This class will be taught using a standards-based grading method, which is not your usual grading method. So let's take some time to understand what is standards-based grading and why it has an advantage over the traditional grading system that we're all familiar with. So first, what is standards-based grading? Before we discuss what is standards-based grading, let's discuss what the traditional grading system usually looks like. So in the traditional grading system, your grade is based off of a percentage, and it has categories such as assignments, tests, essays, homework, and so on. And you get a score in each of those, and then there's some kind of formula that go in the background that adds them all up and averages them or applies weights to them, and then you get 100% to 90% an A, and then 90% to 80% a B, and so on. Often in the traditional grading system, you'll get zeros if you don't do an assignment. You'll get a zero, and then that zero is just going to be part of the average, which means that if you got 100% on something and a 0 on something, it would average to a 50, which is still an F. The reason for why zeros are so detrimental in the traditional grading system can be best exemplified by the example seen right here. We had 3 different students, student 1, student 2, student 3. They've all taken 5 different tests. You can see student 1 started off poor but then got better. They showed growth, and their final grade, a 79C. Student 2 has been pretty consistent, getting about high 70s, low 80s, and their grade average at the end is 79, a C. And then the third student got a 0 on one of the tests because, well, I don't know, let's just say that they were not there that day of the test and haven't made it up yet. And now got scores of 98, 98, 99, 100 on all the rest of the tests. They would still average to a 79%. All 3 of these got the same final grade, but they show very different learning outcomes. If a student like student number 3 is not given the opportunity to make up previous assignments or to reassess their knowledge, then that 0 can tank their grade forever, and that can be potentially very damaging to a student's psyche. And then there's also the idea of extra credit and then group scores. Whereas for standards-based grading system, the focus is on learning goals. Each individual learning objective, is what we're calling them, is going to be assessed. And it's basically, I can do this. I can do a specific skill. And we'll see some examples of those in a momentarily. It measures achievement only. So it only measures whether a student can do what the learning objective says that they can. So the learning objective is, I can represent forces using arrows and vectors. Then if a student can demonstrate that they can represent forces with vectors, then they get marked as proficient in that learning objective. And then we go on to another skill. The only thing that impacts the grade is your performance at any one of these learning objectives. Other things, such as whether you turn in an assignment on time or not, are not impacted by this, because those are not representations of whether you understand the material. Also, the grade is based off the most recent evidence of learning. So let's say that in September, you didn't do too good of a job on a standard. For a whole standard or specific learning objectives, you didn't hit the mark, you tested poorly. Well then, at a later point in time, you can test again or demonstrate your mastery of the content, and this grade will not take into account the previous one, except if there is a mode. If you multiple times, if you, for example, have scored a 1, a really bad score, on 5 different occasions, and then one occasion you got a 3, and you could just say, I'm done. Not quite. Well, I'm going to want you to prove it again at least a couple more times to show that you truly do have it, and it's not some kind of fluke right there. Let's go over some of the key philosophies behind standards-based grading. The first one is that the grades should be accurate. What we mean by grades should be accurate is that they are a representation of a student's mastery, not anything else. Let's look at this comparison between traditional grading and standards-based grading using a car. So on the traditional grading scale, this car would earn a B+. But for standards-based grading, how well a car can be a car is broken down into smaller sections. Like there's the engine, the battery, the transmission, the brakes, the tires. The engine got a score of great, battery's great, transmission's great, brakes need attention. In other words, not good. And the tires, okay. Overall, B+, you're thinking, that's great. But if you're in a car and the brakes need attention, in other words, the brakes are not working as they should, that is urgent. You would not pass that car with a B+. You would say that needs to be fixed right away. This is the idea behind standards-based grading. Instead of averaging everything together, you break it down into the individual skills so you can better see what needs to be learned and what's doing fine. So obviously the mechanic doesn't need to focus on the engine. What they need to focus on is the brakes. Breaking it down like this makes the grade more accurate to the individual skills of a student. It also allows students to see what they need to work on and then can self-direct themselves to work on that skill. If grades are going to be a reflection on the mastery of a subject, then they cannot be compromised by arbitrary penalties. Grades cannot be impacted by the fact that a student turned in an assignment late. Also, whether a student does a homework assignment or not should not be part of the grade. Whether they do the homework assignment or not is going to come up. It's going to be relevant because they're not going to do as well if they don't do the homework assignments on the assessments. Giving a penalty for submitting something in late would be like this mechanic giving a penalty to the overall wellness of the car because the person missed their appointment, they had to reschedule, and now they're in here a little bit later time to get it inspected. That doesn't make any sense. That has nothing to do with how well the car is a car. Another philosophy is that no learning objective is optional. This comes back from the idea of if you average everything out, then they can just say, I'm not going to bother learning this one skill because I'll still get a B+ in the end. I've had this happen when teaching with traditional grading. I've had a student be getting a C in a class, but get a 0 on an entire test. They haven't learned a single thing in that unit, but they were getting a C because they've been turning in all the homework assignments and because they're able to be a student. That doesn't mean they understand the content. No learning objective should be optional. Since scores are not necessarily averaged, a student just can't give up on a certain topic. They can't say, I'm just never going to get it, so I'm not going to bother. Peace out. They're expected to continue studying, learning, and reassessing until they've mastered the topic. That is holding students to a pretty high expectation, which is another part of the standard, or another part of the philosophy. Under the standards-based grading system, students are held to high expectations. This is actually important and can really help a student do better in life and in school because of something called the Pygmalion effect. In other words, teachers that hold students to high expectations will find that the students tend to meet those expectations. But the opposite can be true. If a teacher has low expectations for a student, that student will start to display those low expectations, will not show high achievement. They will show as much achievement as a teacher expects of them. But if you hold a student to high expectations, you can only do that if students are given unlimited opportunities to demonstrate mastery. If you hold students to high expectations but don't give them enough opportunities to show their mastery or don't give them enough time, then they're just going to fail once and never be able to make it up, and then you have the whole class failing. The point isn't to fail the whole class by having high expectations. A teacher that says, I'm failing my whole class, therefore I'm holding them at high expectations, that's not the point. The point should be that they're passing. We're trying to get them to pass, but without compromising our expectations. And the only way to do that is to give unlimited opportunities to demonstrate the mastery. Once I started giving students unlimited time to demonstrate their mastery, once I started giving students multiple attempts at being reassessed on a certain skill, I found that students would learn something that they otherwise would have just given up on. At a teacher conference, I heard a quote that really stuck with me. Popcorn kernels all take different amounts of time to pop, but they all taste great. It does not matter when a student learns something, as long as they learn it. One really big caveat to this: we only have a year, and grades are due every quarter. We do have some deadlines that you have to hit, and you can get into a situation where you have a mountain of work to do at the very end, where it's physically impossible for you to get all of those learning objectives up to a high score. You might get into a situation where it's impossible for you to pass the class or to pass the class with the grade that you want because you've waited too long. So just because you're given unlimited opportunities, and just because the time at which you learn it does not matter, doesn't mean that you can delay, that you can procrastinate. You have to be on top of this. If you're not on top of it, then you'll find yourself in a situation that you will not be able to dig yourself out of. Let's now talk about what the standards are. The previous standard shown was actually a standard for my regular physics class. As this is an AP physics class, we're going to be using a different set of standards. This is the list of standards. Each student, so each one of you, is going to get a copy of this that is individualized, that will show your current score at any time for any of these 41 standards. These standards, where do they come from? So in regular physics class, they come from the NGSS standards, which is essentially the state of California saying that these are the standards that you need to hit. But for AP physics, obviously the standards come from the fact that you're going to be taking an AP test. So this comes from the College Board. These set of standards and learning objectives come from the AP Physics C Mechanics course and exam description. This is essentially saying what the entire course should cover and what the test is going to assess you on. And these are broken into units. So this one, for example, is Unit 1. That's the first one there is representing Unit 1, which is all about kinematics. Point 3, so this is the third topic inside Unit 1, and it is about representing motion. I took the essential knowledge here, which is essentially a list of facts and ideas that you need to know, and converted those into, well, if I go to the one for representing motion, I have actually 4 learning objectives, not just one, 4 learning objectives that are specifically I can do something. So like, for example, the very first one is I can draw a position, velocity, or acceleration graph with respect to time from a description. So that would be the idea behind that would be you're told a situation and you can draw or graph or sketch the motion that's going on, whether it's velocity, position, or acceleration. And then I have some other ones as well, such as like I can solve for an unknown kinematic variable using given information and the kinematic equations of motion in one-dimensional case. This is me taking the larger topic of representing motion for kinematics in one dimension and breaking it into a set of smaller skills that you need to prove. If you can prove that you understand these, then you definitely understand the entire thing. So let's say you have an assessment, and let's say you score 2, 3, 3, and 2 on these learning objectives. So that means that you are developing in your ability to be able to draw these graphs. So maybe you didn't quite draw the graphs 100% correctly, but you got a pretty good idea of it. But let's say you can definitely solve these equations, except for you can't really do it that well for under the cases of free fall. So maybe you forgot one fact about what free fall means. So you got half 2s, half 3s. Your overall score for the standard is a 2. And that gets calculated right here with this fancy equation up at the top. Then what happens is over at the home screen, the score gets imported from that page and it shows up right here under score. So 1 point, standard 1.3 and the score. And your grade gets calculated. Right now it says a C because you have only one entry and it's a 2. But let's give some more entries. So let's say we have a test here and you got a 3. Let's say you have a test here and you got a 3. And so now you have a 3 on that standard, a 3 on the next standard, and a 2 on this standard. Well, now your current grade is a B because you have more 3s than 2s. One thing to note is that these are all links to these sheets below. So all of these standards are broken into smaller learning objectives in the pages, the sheets below. Now, it may seem like a lot of standards. That's 41 standards. That's for the entire year. So you could think of it as 20 or so standards per semester. And since that's what's impacting your grade, that would mean that there are essentially 20 entries each semester in areas that influence your grade. Some of these are actually just one single learning objective. So although it seems like there's a lot of standards, some of them are just simply one skill. So that can be tested really quick and then we move on. In standards-based grading, instead of a 100 to 0% scale, we use a 4-point scale. Well, 5 if you include 0. And these points are 4, 3, 2, and 1, and 0. These are the scores that you're going to be seeing given back to you as feedback on every single learning objective that you do. Let's try to understand what each of these scores would mean. Let's start with the 4. First off, do not expect to get 4s. Your goal is not to get 4s. 4s are rare. They're not given out that often. If you've ever watched The Great British Baking Show, they're like a handshake from Paul Hollywood.
That, my friend.
No.
There you are.
Honestly, that is a fantastic pie.
This is not given out every day, and so they shouldn't be the goal. And you don't need to earn a single 4 to get an A in the class. This is above and beyond. So the idea behind this, what is mastery? It says, I understand the concept well enough to fluently apply the concept to unusual and challenging scenarios. I could solve problems with few to no stumbles and quickly. Like, you are just a master of this. But 4s are not what we're targeting. 3s are what we're going to be targeting. In order to get an A, you must get all 3s. So what is a 3? The 3 stands for proficient. It means that you can apply your understanding to familiar situations with little to no errors, and you meet the expectations of the learning target. So if the learning target says, I can do blank, then you can do blank. You understand all vocabulary words commonly associated with the standard and can use them correctly. Basically, you know this. It's very easy for a teacher to see when a student has got the subject, when they understand the concept. Let's contrast that with a number 2, which is developing. So if 3 is proficient and you got it, you're good, you don't need to learn any, you're great. Then 2 is you're getting there, but you're not quite there yet. So you have partial understanding of the standard, or you understand parts of it, but may not be able to apply it correctly. So you make lots of mistakes, or mistakes that are not just small mistakes like, oh, I forgot a negative here, but fundamental mistakes. If I only need to give you a little bit of guidance for you to fix the problems that you have during a problem, then you might be a 2. You still made the problems. You were still unable to get an answer, the correct answer alone. You needed a little bit of help. But if you only need a little bit of help, then you're probably at a 2. Whereas a 1, which stands for beginning, if you got a 1 on a learning objective, this means you have little to no understanding of the standard. You need step-by-step guidance. So I can't just give you a little hint here and then you found the mistake and you fix it and you go through and you're good. If I'm helping you, I'm having to give you multiple hints. I'm having to give you step-by-steps. I'm having to tell you again and again different directions. Now a 0, meaning insufficient data. The only time you're going to get a 0 is when you've just not shown me at all that you can do the standard. It's basically you left the problem blank, or you didn't turn in the lab report. That's a big one. Students every year keep not turning in their lab reports, and so they keep getting 0s, and 0s are automatic Fs. If this happens to you, just remember you can always reassess. An F is not permanent because you have unlimited attempts to fix that. You can always fix it. You can always get it better. But until you show me that you can do something, it's going to be a 0 or an F. Nothing is optional. If there is an assignment, you got to do it. If there's a test, you got to take it. Now I know what's going through all your minds. This standards-based grading is great and all, but what does that mean for my report card? How do I get an A? Well, this is how. To earn an A, you have to achieve an average proficiency score of 3.0 or higher across all standards and have 0 2s or below. The philosophy is, if a student got an A, then they have met all the standards. They have shown proficiency, not necessarily mastery, but proficiency on all the standards. That means you can't get a 2 on any standard. Any one standard will automatically bring you down to a B if you get a 2 on it. So how do you earn a B? Well, a B is earned if you have an average of 2.5 or higher. So on average, you're closer to proficient than you are developing across all standards. And you cannot have a single 1. Notice throughout these, it's not just about your average. There's also a hard, fast rule that you cannot have a single 1 or a single 0 or a single 2, depending on which grade you're talking about. So to earn a B, you have to have a 2.5 average proficiency score or higher across all standards and 0 1s. To earn a C, you have to achieve an average proficiency score of 2.0 or higher. Essentially, you can see that as a 2.0. That's like the grade point system. That's an average of a C. So you have to average a C or you average a 2 across all the standards, but you cannot have a single 1. So you can't just have a bunch of 1s and a bunch of Bs and they average out and you get a C. You have to bring those 1s up to 2s. So this is dealing between the ranges of 2.0 to 2.4. You will earn a D if you have an average proficiency score of 1.5 or higher. So in other words, you have between a 1.5 and a 1.99999 across all standards with 0 zeros. You cannot have a single 0. Any standard that's a 0 will automatically have you as an F. But grades like these are temporary. Because you have unlimited chances to show your proficiency because you have a limited reassessment attempts. If you currently have a grade of an F, you shouldn't think that you're completely a failure and that you need to drop out of the class. No, it's probably just one learning objective in one standard. You missed the test. You were like gone on that day of the test. And all you need to do is just show me that you can do it. And then that F would go away. So to recap, A, all threes. B, mostly threes. C, mostly twos, some threes. D, mostly twos, but some ones. And F, a 0 or mostly ones and a few twos. I like to end my videos with time for students to apply what they've just learned. Because the only way to learn something is by doing something. In order to learn, you must be active. So here are 3 questions that I want you to answer in your notes. First one is, what is needed to earn an A in Mr. Martin's physics class? Second one is, why should you not freak out if your current grade is an F? And the third one, what is the difference between a 1, 2, and a 3?